You want to do it now? Okay. Do we have a recommendation from the water board?
Mayor, and what I might suggest is if we could call on John Utton, he is the water rights attorney retained by Raton, to go through the proposed settlement agreement, give you some details on that, and then I believe we would ask for a recommendation from water board and consideration by the commission. Now, just a little background on Mr. Utton. He has been Raton's water right attorney for an extended period of time, a long time. He has traveled up today to give you the information and the water board and the public. So, Mr. Utton, if you come forward. I would also add that Dan Campbell, general manager from Raton Waterworks, has worked on the proposed settlement agreement for more than 2 years now, and it's been some time to get to this point where we would bring this in front of the water board and in front of the city commission. So, gentlemen.
At this point, I would just kind of start off before John explains this document. This has been an effort to where the capular rights were something that the city of Raton purchased in the 50s as irrigated land as one of our alternate sources. The same as we did at Eagle's Nest. Eagle's Nest was what was developed. This has always been our third alternate. Could be provided in an emergency. Track fire was a prime instance. If something would have happened to one of our sources, Malloy would have been seriously affected. A pipeline could be discussed. At this point, that's never been necessary. But at the same time, the Raton public did invest in this asset, and we've monitored that basin, and as it was declared in 2006, we've made sure that we have done some irrigation out there, but we've actually made sure our property was protected. It's been irrigated through the years. And in 1991, we also filed for a municipal right out of that basin. So in both those cases, what takes place out there does affect it, to where this was an effort we were monitoring, and I guess from that point, I would let John give a concise explanation of what this document consists of.
Happy to do that. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Mayor Mance and commissioners and water board members. This settlement, I think, achieves the objective that I was assigned, along with Dan Campbell, of trying to protect the city's water resources and try to conserve water for future needs for the city. As Mr. Campbell mentioned, the Capulan Basin is a important and an approximate source of supply for future city needs, if need be. It's really kind of a third alternative source that could be important in the future. The other two city sources are surface water, and those are, while renewable, less reliable. They, in cycles of drought, they can diminish, and Capulan Basin as a groundwater source that could provide backup supply. The city has taken various steps over the years to assure, first to secure water rights there and then to protect them. And so this settlement agreement is designed from Raton's standpoint to protect its water rights there and try to conserve water in the basin. I think it does that in various respects. As an initial matter, as you know, the protest that the city filed was when one of the ranches out there sought to appropriate a fairly sizable chunk of new water from the basin. The city, along with other landowners out there, were concerned about that and filed protests saying, wait a minute, this is a limited resource. We already have water rights there. We need to protect those. And then through the course of the proceedings in front of the state engineer, there was a settlement mediation in Santa Fe, and we spent a day there and were able to reach proposed terms which are contained in the settlement agreement. The two other ranches, Silver Spur and King Ranch, that also protested, also are agreeing to these terms, along with Bonds Ranch, who was the ranch that sought the new quantity of water. As a result of the settlement, the bond application would be drastically reduced. They would agree to only receive a new appropriation of 150 acre feet, less than half of what they had originally applied for. In addition, the state engineers agreed to take steps to analyze whether the basin should be closed or whether there should be further administration of the basin, including by designating critical management areas. And they've already started that process, and we feel confident that they're going to look at that closely. And as we expect, that because of the limited resource there, that they will put in measures to protect that from further appropriation. So we're hopeful that the 150 acre feet that would be agreed to here would be the last major appropriation. There is an exception for domestic uses and stock uses. Those would be allowed, but any big further irrigation use or other hit on the aquifer, no further big straws on the aquifer. Another important item is that the parties and the state engineer office would support the city's application for approval of a state conservation program for Raton's water rights. We're saying, we've acquired these for municipal purposes. We don't want to just pump them out there for irrigation purposes. We really want to just leave the water in the aquifer for future uses, conserve it there. And we're already starting to work with the state engineer office in Cimarron on doing that. And that process will probably take into next year. But I think we're hopeful by the end of next year the state will have approved our conservation program. Some of the things that the city is participating in to make this deal work, to get some of the things I just described, we're agreeing to convey a very small portion of the irrigation rights that Raton owns out there, and that total would be 3.4 acre feet, which is the water right associated with about 1.7 acres, so a little over an acre and a half of irrigated lands. We would essentially would agree to fallow that acreage and convey those water rights to bonds so they could have an offset that's needed for permitting purposes. So that of the total city right out there of 1,345 acre feet, this is just a very small portion, but it's needed to make the deal work. The other thing that we would be doing is agreeing to lease less than half of the irrigation rights out there that the city owns, 150 acre feet, to bonds for up to 60 years. They would be paying for both of these things. They would be paying us market rate for the lease and market rate for the small conveyance. And so those things make sense in terms of the whole package and are done at a market rate. And so I think from an overall settlement perspective, we recommend that you consider and approve this settlement agreement. It seems to be a good result for all the parties and puts us on a conservation path for that basin rather than more straws and racing to the bottom. So be happy at this point to answer any questions or ask Dan to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would point out one thing to the Water Board and the Commission. There are a number of documents attached to the agreement as exhibits, and in Exhibit E, it is formatted for signature of the Raton City Manager. So if you consider approval of that in your action, if you could authorize execution of Exhibit E by the Raton City Manager, and that is the water rights lease agreement.
I would move to approve the Capulan Water Rights Settlement Agreement between the City of Raton, Bonds Ranch, King Family Land Company, LLC, King Family Cattle Company, LLC, Silver Spur Land and Cattle Company, LLC, and allow city manager to sign Exhibit E.
And that's a mouthful, Commissioners, but I wonder if we could kind of have the Water Board check in with a recommendation to the Commission prior to your consideration of it, your action. And so we have Chairman of the Raton Waterworks, Al Litchfield, President, who has participated in the negotiations for this agreement throughout.
Yeah, first of all, thanks to the folks that put a lot of effort into this last 2.5 years. quite a few people, but primarily John and Dan, in bringing this thing to the table tonight. And with that said, I would recommend that the joint City Commission, Water Board approve this settlement agreement.
And is that in form of a motion?
As a recommendation,
Think we would
and
go-
if you want to make it a motion, yes.
And I think that's what we would look for is
Okay.
vote by the
So
water board
it's
for
so
that
moved.
recommendation. And
Is there a second?
Okay,
Hold on, so, who made the motion?
I
Al
went
did.
ahead, I don't
Okay.
usually, but as long as I
Seconded
was
by
talking, right?
Joe?
Mark and Joe,
Mark. We have 2 seconds. Thank you.
thank you.
And that's to recommend approval.
Correct.
You want to vote on that with the water board, or do we need to?
Probably do a roll call vote.
I'll do a roll call vote of the water board. Al Litchfield,
Yes.
Mark Morris.
Yes.
Joe Gallardi,
Yes.
Commissioner Chavez.
Yes.
Neil Sagata.
Yes.
I would like to once again recommend that we accept the Capulan Water Rights Settlement Agreement between the City of Raton and Bonds Ranch, King Family Land Company LLC, King Family Cattle Company LLC, Silver Spur Land Company, Land and Cattle Company LLC, and allow Scott Berry, City Manager, to sign the agreement on Exhibit E.
I would second that motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the Capulan Water Rights Settlement Agreement between the City of Raton, the Bonds Ranch, King Family Land Company, LLC, and King Family Cattle Company, LLC, Silver Spur Land and Cattle Company, LLC. We have a roll call vote?
Commissioner Schuster,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Sagata.
Yes.
Commissioner Chavez.
Yes.
Commissioner Giacomo,
Yes.
Mayor Mance.
Yes, motion passes.
Good job, guys.
Is there any other business to come before this body? Seeing none, meeting adjourned. Of the November 28th, 2017 regular commission meeting minutes.
Madam Mayor, there was 2 small punctuation errors that were corrected, so I make a motion to approve the amended minutes.
Second it.
We have a motion and a second to approve the regular commission meeting minutes for November 28th, 2017 as amended. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Could I make just one note?
Sure,
I thought, whatever you guys did, it was sure a lot easier to read these this time
yeah.
than they have been in the past. Yeah.
Bigger.
Yeah. So thank you
Thank
for
you, I
that.
appreciate that. I thought I might be a little rusty.
No, it was pretty pleasant to read.
Deliberate and act on legislative capital outlay priorities. Mr. Berry.
Mayor and Commission, as you see in your memorandum, the New Mexico State Legislature will convene in a regular session on January 16th. This will be a short session or a 30-day session. During the 30-day session, primarily they're concerned with approving a state budget. There's not a lot of legislation considered outside of the financial considerations, but we do have an expectation that some capital outlay will be funded during this 2018 session. I've prepared a memo for you with my recommendations as far as submission of requests for capital outlay funding from the City of Raton to the legislature or legislative council service. And I would ask for your consideration at the meeting tonight, and that would give me time to prepare documents and work on getting those submitted to Legislative Council service. We would meet again on January 9th. We would have time to have additional consideration if you would like that time. However, I think the requests are fairly straightforward. They're priorities that we talk about and we set throughout the year, primarily through our Infrastructure Capital Improvement Plan, or ICIP plan, and definitely consideration for capital outlay funding would have to be identified as a high priority on the ICIP as approved by the commission. You'll remember that we talked about that in the summer months, and we submitted the ICIP in September. You'll find a copy of that current ICIP in your packet. The thing that I would note is there are several projects that we've talked about in the past and we've talked about during the ICIP that I have left off of our recommendations for request. Improvements to Lake Maloya Dam and Spillway are a high priority on our ICIP. I think it's ranked as number 2. But yet, with activities that are going on currently on Maloya, I have not made that recommendation. Mr. Campbell and I have talked about that, and so we currently are in the process of looking at priorities on Maloya and what those proposed improvements would cost. There is an engineer that has been retained through past capital outlay, and we're really at the end of that process, but it is not finalized as of yet. And so the state engineer has identified Maloya as a high priority in their system, and we may talk about potential funding through that, but we really need to identify those priorities through our preliminary engineering report. There's some hydrology that's still underway by the engineer. That's AECOM, the name of the firm, and a couple of things that have to get done before we really identify where we're going next on Maloya. But if you remember the conversation on Maloya, there are a number of really high dollar improvements that the state engineer would talk about. So that planning process is especially important. In my memo, what I've laid out for the commission is I believe that replacement of public works equipment has risen to our top priority currently. So this would be equipment that we would use in the course of maintaining drainage, patching, fixing, repairing streets, picking up waste wherever that occurs. Generally, we see these piles that accumulate in the alleys as far as going and picking those up, and a lot of other things that our public works crew does. Works on parks, works on solid waste system, and we are really at the end of the life of a lot of our equipment, and we're really limping along. And so what happens then is the equipment spends a lot of time getting repaired in the shop. Those repairs are getting expensive, and I would really recommend to the commission that we prioritize the replacement of this. I would ask you to consider a request for capital outlay in the amount of $200,000 that would be put towards public works equipment. That could consist of replacement of a loader, asphalt patching equipment, snow control or snow equipment, equipment that we would use every day, so multi-purpose trucks or haulage equipment. So I've listed that as number 1. In past years, our top priority has been city street improvements, still a priority. I think that we have made some improvements on some of the chronic streets that we spend a lot of time patching over the past 3 years. We're not running out of streets to fix or patch, and so that will remain as a high priority. I've listed it here as a second priority for us, and I've recommended to y'all that we request $500,000 for street improvements. Drainage system improvements, this would be a follow-up to drainage improvements that we made in the original town site area a couple of years ago. We have a lot more of that type of work to do, so we've listed that in the I would recommend that we request $250,000 from capital outlay for that work. And then lastly, I've listed transfer station construction and improvements. Now, we are preparing a package to request bids for the transfer station. We will go forward with bidding the work and commencing the work. And if an item like this was funded, we would then add additional improvements to the transfer station. But the intent is to build the transfer station with available funding, as we've talked about before. And I'll hold up there, Mayor and Commission, and I'll answer any questions that you might have.
Are we resubmitting this project summary? Or do we not even submit that?
That is related to the ICIP, which we have submitted, and then the state has a process for evaluation of that. But any of the agencies that would look for that information would access that project summary, actually the lengthy ICIP. So that was submitted in September, and they do have that.
Okay, even though our order has changed.
We had brought that up to date, and, yes, we don't step down that list, but what we're talking about are all identified as high priorities by the commission under the ICIP.
And that's basically what capital outlay and them look for, is make sure it's on your list.
Yeah, they want it on the list.
Right.
Yeah.
That's correct.
It's got to be on the list, I
Right.
think.
There's no more questions. I'll make a motion to approve legislative capital outlay priorities.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the legislative capital outlay priorities. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Deliberate and act on Resolution 2017-61, fiscal year 18 budget adjustment number 6. Michael Ann?
Mayor and Commission, in your packet is budget adjustment number 6. I've provided you with a version that's highlighted with some corrections that I made. I think most of the adjustments are pretty straightforward. In the Law Enforcement Protection Fund and the debt service, we did pay off the police vehicle loan that we had. And so after that was all paid up, we had a small rebate of some excess interest from that note. So that was rebated to us, and it was $103. So in addition to that money going back to the Law Enforcement Protection Fund, that's where the loan was paid for out of those funds, we also are going to reallocate some funds within line items in the LEPF so that we can finish the server and get that installed for the police department. So that's kind of our number one priority with this year's funding in that fund. We are working with NMFA to proceed probably in January with paperwork for another loan for some police vehicles. So they'll actually have their Board of Finance meeting this month. So I'll give you an update on that next month. And then just the sale of ambulance in the EMS fund, and solid waste, an adjustment to some legal services line item. So with those changes, I would recommend approval.
I'll make a motion to approve Resolution 2017-61 FY18 budget adjustment number 6.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second to approve Resolution 2017-61, fiscal year 18 budget adjustment number 6. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Deliberate and act on Resolution 2017-62, disposal of surplus property, landfill compactor. Mr. Barry?
Mayor and Commission, the city of Raton had previously purchased a landfill compactor. It is a 2001 Caterpillar 816F machine, and used that during the operation of our municipal landfill. That landfill compactor now has been parked for about 3 years when we ceased operation of a landfill. And we would ask the commission to consider disposal of the piece of equipment and declare it as surplus. And then if that is the commission's wishes, we would then begin a process of accepting bids on it from interested parties and see if we could turn that into some cash, which then I think we again would look at replacing some of that critical equipment that we have. But this is a machine that is specific to a landfill. It really does not have a use outside of operating a landfill. I would point out that there may be what we would expect is a limited market for a piece of equipment like this. Many of the big landfills would have something that is a lot bigger and would not consider this compactor. So we're really limited to some of the smaller landfills that are still in operation that would be similar to the Raton landfill. And I don't think that we would get much interest from larger landfills. So there are a couple of parties that we have talked to. We think that there may be some interest. I think that upon your consideration of this resolution, we would ask for bids. We could go an auction process as well. I believe that we would have to consult with Department of Finance administration, but if there was contemplated a sale, we would bring that back to the commission for your consideration. Now, in advance of this, we have asked for appraisal prices on the machine. You see that the opinions that we got back ranged up to about $130,000. What I would point out to the commission is that those are not based on comparable sales. Those are based on listings of comparable pieces of equipment, but we really have not found somewhere out there where a similar piece of equipment has been sold and established what a comparable sale would be. So the $130,000, I would take that with a grain of salt a little bit. I would expect that we would see a bid maybe slightly less than that, but we would go through that process. And of course, the best thing is to identify a couple of different parties that would be interested in bidding on that. That would be ideal for us. So we would commence that process following your consideration of this resolution.
Make a motion to approve resolution 2017-62, disposal of surplus property landfill compactor.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve resolution 2017-62, disposal of surplus property landfill compactor. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Deliberate and act on transfer station project RIP 00011 NMED loan agreement amendment 1. Mr. Berry?
And Mayor, I am going to ask Michael Ann to comment on this action.
Mayor and Commission, we were recently contacted by the New Mexico Environment Department. We have spent, this is kind of a loan grant program, and the portion of the loan proceeds were expended first, and that was $25,000. So we've submitted the necessary documents for that portion of the project completion on the transfer station project, and that now puts this into a loan repayment. And so that's essentially what this agreement is. And they've provided us with an amortization schedule. So our first loan payment isn't due until the next fiscal year. But you'll see it's pretty low interest and $25,000 for 20 years. And the annual payments are $1,584. So our first payment would be November 8th of 2018. So that's something we would budget for in the next fiscal year.
What does the balance, you probably don't even know right off the top of your head, in the enterprise fund?
I don't have a financial report with me. It's a little over $500,000. I mean, I don't believe there's any prepayment penalties, and I think that's something we could talk about when we prepare next year's budget.
Yeah, I'd like to
We
see
could
if we,
potentially make the minimum payment in November, or we could potentially probably pay the entire thing off. So I
yeah,
think
it's
that's
just,
the
it depends on the legal fees, because you had quite a hefty increase to that.
Correct.
So it would be something I would like us to consider.
Okay. So
Paying
yeah,
off.
we would just discuss it during our budget
Okay,
discussions as we prepare the FY19 budget.
all right.
But
I
that
think-
would definitely be an option.
I think you're correct, Mayor. We have several things going, construction of the transfer station, and of course, we probably would look for some additional funding. We would have some additional needs there. We do have legal fees related to the landfill, and we continue to replace containers in town, so we have a number of things, but landfill reclamation would be another thing that we have out there. So I think we would go according to the amortization schedule for a short time, and I think there's gonna come a time when we could probably.
Right, it may
eliminate
not
the-
be right at
pay the
this
debt.
moment.
Correct.
I know the interest is small, but when you look at the amount, it's huge.
Mr. Mayor, I'd make a motion that we accept well, we act on the transfer station project RIP 000011 NMED loan agreement, Amendment 1.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the transfer station project RIP 00011 NMED loan agreement amendment number 1. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. City managers report.
Mayor and Commission, I would report to the Commission that construction of Taxiway Delta at the Raton Municipal Airport and the reconstruction of Taxiway Alpha, both projects are substantially complete. Remaining work includes some signage, pavement markings, and reseeding. And the pavement is complete, earthwork is complete, cleanup is essentially done. The contractor would begin to demobilize at this point. I'm very happy with construction of the project. We're glad that we got it done and the weather cooperated with that. However, we are into some cold weather now, and as far as the pavement markings, the other work we'll probably go ahead and complete, and work slows down around Christmas time, but we would probably complete the signage and the reseeding. Pavement markings may get done at that time if weather cooperates, but in all likelihood, we would hold some money on the project and do the pavement markings in March would probably be the time frame for that. So I wanted to report that to the commission. I attended an initial meeting of a community branding effort, and this is in collaboration with Raton Main Street and New Mexico Main Street. New Mexico Main Street has provided a consultant, Robin Beaubien, who had come to Raton and met with a couple of us to get a start on the branding effort. We talked about a schedule, and at the end of the schedule, we would try to back into a brand launch event, and we had tentatively scheduled August of 2018 to have that brand launch event after we've completed some of the activities. Robin is a revitalist specialist in promotion, and this is a service that is provided by New Mexico Main Street. On that same date, December 4th, New Mexico Main Street also and Raton Main Street conducted a workshop called Developing Businesses and Buildings, and I attended that workshop. They brought 6 speakers to Raton. They covered a variety of topics that include discussion of the key features of the Great Blocks project, business planning, assets to grow a creative economy, marketing and promotion, building rehabilitation methods, financing buildings and businesses, and priorities and business development strategies. So they're really exceptional partners, both New Mexico Main Street and Raton Main Street, and their hard work just continues to revitalize this downtown area. So I would again express my thanks to both organizations. Our city treasurer, Antonucci, has a compilation of a statement of municipal policy and annual resolutions in advance of the legislative session. We can make these available to the commission however you would like. You could come in and read this, and you can see there's a lot of volume here. We can try to scan these and send them to you electronically, or we can make you a copy. Now, for those of you that attended the annual conference in Clovis, you might have a copy around of these policies and annual resolutions. These are the priorities that were set throughout the year and approved at the Clovis Convention for members of the Municipal League, and they'll be presented to legislative representatives and let them know what's important to the Municipal League. But we have that available if you would like to look at that, or if you would like to receive a copy of that. I have provided a letter for you, and this letter will authorize a purchase of new dispatch consoles for the Raton Police Department and the Raton Dispatch Center. It is funding in the amount of $53,634.78 from Department of Finance Administration Local Government Division. They will pay directly for these improvements to our dispatch center, and I do want to point out that this grant is the result of a lot of hard work by Carol Baca, our manager of the dispatch center, and she really worked on this, and it looked like we may get this at sometime during 2018, but due to her diligence on this, as you can see from the letter, this project is going to go very quickly. We expect the equipment to be installed in January of 2018. And so I want to say thanks to Carol for all of her hard work there. One last thing, Mayor. We've continued to work on the community kitchen project. We have not completed those improvements or the new equipment that were funded under the RUS grant. However, we do have an entrepreneur that's using the community kitchen currently. We have a candy making operation that is underway there, a modest start for a community kitchen, but we're optimistic about that. So that's all I have, Mayor.
As far as the branding goes, what is it? What's the economic development? What's it called? I can't even think.
And Commissioner Chavez was also in attendance at that preliminary branding meeting, and I don't know, Ronnie, if you have some perspective on that meeting. But typically what we are attempting to do is call down some ideas on what Raton's identity will be going forward. And that's a bit of a task. We've talked about that for a number of years.
Right, I was going to say.
There's a lot of ideas, a lot of information, and really getting to that effective identity that's going to distinguish you out there in the big wide world. That's a challenge.
Yes, it is. I was
Commissioner?
going to say, Grow Raton has been working on this for, and I don't know if
Correct.
they have information they could pass on.
Correct.
Or whatever, but.
Well, Ms. Bobian was excellent. She's very informative and the plans that they have. We're also incorporating, and we had talked to Bernard Sandoval and making this. And so it's going forward pretty fast now. And like you said, Main Street and the Raton Main Street and New Mexico Main Street are both working on this diligently with us, so it's very good.
And Mayor, what I would anticipate is that we form a committee which would represent all of the stakeholders in town, some city staff. I think Commissioner Chavez is engaged, but we would, those groups that have done work previously, we definitely want them involved in the discussion. And then a series of public meetings as well to try to get everyone from the community to discuss and put their 2 cents in on the effort.
She recommended like a task force of 8 to 10 local community members that are interested in this, and they sit down and come up with ideas, and then until they finally can agree on one, and then submit it to the public.
Yeah, that's been the problem, agreeing on one. Yeah. Is there anything else, any other business to come before this body? Seeing none, meeting adjourned.